What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Fours, we're going to go over what an Apex class is and how you can create one in Salesforce. Alright guys, welcome back to this Introduction to Apex tutorial series where we learn the fundamental skills necessary to become a developer on the Salesforce platform. Today we are going to go over what an Apex class is, and then we're just going to quickly create one together. As far as what an Apex class is, first thing I want to do is just drop the word Apex from that entirely and just disregard it and figure out what a class is. Because no matter what, whether you're developing in the Apex programming language, which we go over that in a prior video in this series, or if you're writing this in Java or C# or some other object-oriented programming language, the purpose of a class is typically the same. One of the best ways I've heard it described is a blueprint for creating objects, which I know in Salesforce especially is very confusing because, you know, we call database tables objects as well. You know, when you go in, you point and click, you create objects. But let's just break that down even more, right? So if a class is a blueprint for an object, imagine that you had a class that was supposed to create functionality or generate functionality for a toaster. So say you had a toaster, right? And you wanted to build some functionality for that toaster. You wanted to be able to turn up the heat on the toaster. You wanted to be able to have a timer for the toaster, and who knows what else. Now, there are thousands, somehow, of toaster types throughout the world. You know, there's not just one type of toaster. There's 1,000 different toasters made by thousands of companies. Or maybe it's only like 5 that own thousands of different subsidiaries. Who knows? But that's not the point. The point is you've got a toaster and you want to create functionality for it. So when we create a class, we're creating a blueprint for that toaster. So if I created a class called toaster, which is maybe not the best name for a class, but let's just start simple. I'd want to create a blueprint that could work for any toaster type I could think up, right? So how you actually get to that point is, you know, there's a lot more conversation that we'll have throughout this tutorial series, but you want to make a blueprint for it. So maybe there's some functionality in here that's a timer, right? So you'd have a toaster timer, and maybe there's the heat. So you'd say set heat level, right? Or this should also be something like set toaster timer. Or there could be something like stop toaster manually. Well, actually, you wouldn't want it to be that specific. So it'd be like stop toaster. And so you have this blueprint for a toaster now, right? So we've got this toaster class, and it has some functionality where we can set the toaster timer, we can set the heat level, we can stop the toaster. And this could, if we continue to build this out, potentially work for any type of toaster on the face of the earth. There's more to that, obviously, but that's the idea. Is a class is a blueprint for an object, but less specific than that, it's a blueprint for something, right? It doesn't actually have to be a physical object. It's the one thing I don't necessarily like about that, because when we say a class is a blueprint for an object, or a class represents an object, which is what you see most often out there, it's very confusing because people are like, well, okay, I'm not making an object representation. I mean, in Salesforce, I'm never going to make a toaster, right? Well, at least I don't think so. You never know. But it could be a blueprint for some kind of service that you're providing to your Salesforce users. So, for instance, in one of my prior tutorial videos, I created a mapping application, right, that could map records on an actual like Google Map sheet, right? It could be a blueprint for that mapping application. And that mapping application blueprint could work anywhere, right? You could use that to map leads on a map, or you could use it to map contacts on a map, and it would work no matter what. And that's really the goal when you create a class, is to create a blueprint for an object or a service that you are providing to your users, right? Nothing more, well, maybe a little more from time to time, but certainly nothing less. As far as, and now that we know what an Apex class is, I hope, a blueprint for a representation of an object, like an opportunity calculator, you could kind of maybe physically hold one of those, or really what I call a service for your users, some kind of service that they can use, right? So class, blueprint for an object, regardless of whether it's in the Apex programming language or the Java programming language or C# or whatever else, right? As far as how you actually create a class in Salesforce, there are lots of different ways. But if you've watched the rest of the videos in this tutorial series, I'm obviously pretty fond of using what are called IDEs. And there are videos that go over that. So definitely, if you don't know what an IDE is or what I'm working in right now, take a look at the 4 videos prior to this one in this tutorial series, and they'll get you all set up. So my favorite way to create a class in Salesforce is to just open up my IDE. My preferred one is IntelliJ and Illuminated Cloud 2. And then you just come right over here after you've set up your project, which we do together in another video. But after you set up your project, you can right-click on the classes folder here and hit New Apex Class. And that's going to bring up this little window here that allows us to name and generate a new Apex class for our Salesforce instance. So I already kind of did this really quick in front of you just a second ago, but we'll name our class something like mapping service. And that's it. We've created our class in our Salesforce environment. I'd need to save this, of course, so I could hit Control S, and in this IDE and all the other ones that you'll probably get accustomed to, it'll just save this directly into my Salesforce org. And I can actually see that. If I log into my Salesforce org, we will just check out and make sure it actually happened. So I did that in my IDE, of course, but we can see over here in Salesforce, if we went either to Apex Classes in Setup, which you get to set up by clicking the gear up here and going to Setup. We can go to Apex Classes and see that, oh boy, that's what happens when you use a weird browser. We can see that, what did I call this? Mapping service. Mapping service is in here and ready to go if I ever need it. And you can also check it out in the developer console as well. we can, in the developer console, open up the mapping service. And there it is. And that's our class. Real quick, I want to go over how you can actually create an Apex class within Visual Studio Code, because the setup is just a little different. The steps you need to take are just a little different than in IntelliJ. So I'll bring over Visual Studio Code, and basically what we are going to do after you have your project set up and Visual Studio Code all set up, which we do cover in a prior video, then just hit Control-Shift-P, and there is a command called Create Apex Class, and you'll just click on that command in the command palette. Then you'll type in the name of your class, whatever it is. So if we were making the mapping service one again, we just put in mapping service. And typically you're just going to use this default directory unless the Salesforce org you work in has a custom folder structure. Most of the time they don't. So we'll just go with that. Yes, I'm fine overriding that. And it is going to automatically create that for you. And if I hit Control-S, it's going to save this directly to my org, and just like in IntelliJ. So that's it. Pretty quick and easy, but it is a little bit different in Visual Studio Code as opposed to IntelliJ. So that about wraps this video up. In the next one, we are going to go over what variables are and how you can use them in your Apex classes. If you like this video, make sure to actually like it, subscribe if you want to see more of them, and hit the bell button if you want to see if you want to be notified of when the next video in this tutorial series actually gets uploaded. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I will see you in the next episode.